Michel de Montaigne's Essays, first published in 1580, is a groundbreaking work that introduced the personal essay as a literary form, spanning a wide range of topics from friendship, education, and death to vanity, idleness, and the nature of truth. These writings are deeply introspective and often meandering, blending anecdote, classical philosophy, and candid self-exploration. Montaigne's goal wasn't to teach or preach, but to explore his own thoughts with honesty and humility, inviting readers into his inner world. The result is a timeless collection that feels surprisingly modern, offering wisdom not as fixed conclusions, but as reflections in progress. Michel de Montaigne, 1533 to 1592, was a French Renaissance philosopher, statesman, and writer best known for popularizing the essay as a literary genre. Born into a wealthy family near Bordeaux, Montaigne received a classical education steeped in Latin and Greek. After a career in law and politics, he retired to his family estate and began writing the essays. These works were shaped by his skeptical outlook and stoic leanings, as well as his deep interest in human behavior, mortality, and personal integrity. Montaigne's candid voice, reflective tone, and willingness to question even himself made him one of the most influential thinkers of the early modern period. Michel de Montaigne's essays begin with a tone of modesty and self-reflection. He admits from the outset that he writes not to teach others, but to understand himself. His method is exploratory, almost conversational, as he meanders through ideas, drawing from his personal experiences, classical knowledge, and observations of human nature. One of his earliest essays, By Diverse Means We Arrive at the Same End, showcases his philosophical pluralism. He points out how people with different methods and temperaments may still reach the same conclusions in life, emphasizing that truth may not be a single path, but a convergence of many. This relativism is a core part of Montaigne's worldview. He is skeptical of certainty and distrustful of rigid dogma. On idleness, Montaigne warns that an unoccupied mind becomes fertile ground for wandering thoughts and anxieties. Upon retiring from public life, he finds his mind more active than ever, a reminder that idleness does not bring peace unless one learns to master one's inner world. This theme ties into his Stoic influences. The battle for serenity is internal, not dependent on external affairs. His reflections on the fragility of the human condition often circle back to death. In that to study philosophy is to learn to die, he echoes the classical Stoics and Epicureans, arguing that the wise man continually prepares for death, not as a morbid act, but as a way of detaching from life's illusions. To Montaigne, readiness for death is what grants freedom in life. Montaigne also delves into the limitations of reason. An Apology for Raymond Sebond, one of his longest and most complex essays, he challenges the supremacy of human reason, suggesting that animals often act with more natural wisdom than men. He points out how pride in our reasoning often blinds us to our ignorance. This essay is filled with skeptical arguments, questioning whether humans are truly superior or just self-important. It also reveals Montaigne's broad reading and careful synthesis of ancient thinkers. While he does not advocate abandoning reason, he sees its bounds clearly and argues for humility in the face of nature and the divine. Friendship is another major theme in the essays, especially in On Friendship, where Montaigne pays tribute to his close companion Etienne de la Boétie. He distinguishes between ordinary social relationships, which are based on utility or pleasure, and the rare, soul-deep union that he shared with La Boétie. Their bond, he writes, was so complete that it seemed to fuse their identities into one. This ideal of friendship goes beyond the practical. It is a meeting of equals, anchored in mutual respect and virtue. The death of La Boétie profoundly affected Montaigne, and much of his introspection can be traced to the solitude that followed. His reflections on education also deserve mention, and on the education of children, Montaigne criticizes rote memorization and passive learning. Instead, he advocates a more Socratic method learning through dialogue, questioning, and experience. He believes the goal of education is not to fill the mind with facts, but to shape character and judgment. The essay is full of insight into the psychological development of children and the role of the teacher as a guide rather than a lecturer. Montaigne anticipates modern progressive educational theories, emphasizing flexibility, critical thinking, and moral development over strict adherence to authority. In this first portion of his essays, Montaigne sets the tone for what is to follow, a sincere, honest, and deeply human examination of what it means to live well. His writing is not systematic and deliberately, so he believes truth cannot be pinned down with formulas. He trusts in reflection, doubt, and personal experience over grand systems of philosophy. Montaigne's genius lies in his ability to be deeply philosophical without being abstract, to write from the self, but for all of us. As Montaigne continues his essays, he deepens his exploration into the contradictions and paradoxes of human nature. One of the recurring themes is the inconsistency of our behavior and thought. On the inconstancy of our actions, he notes how individuals often behave unpredictably, not just from person to person, but within themselves over time. One day we are brave, the next cowardly. Today we are generous, tomorrow petty. Montaigne resists the idea of a unified, stable self. Instead, he embraces a vision of the human being as changeable, even contradictory, a fluid mix of instinct, reason, and habit. He sees this not as a flaw to be corrected, but as a fundamental aspect of what it means to be human. This attitude contributes to Montaigne's signature humility. He frequently discloses his own flaws, not to apologize, but to examine them honestly. And on drunkenness, for example, he reflects on how people excuse or condemn drunken behavior, depending on context. Yet few admit the real draw of intoxication, the escape from consciousness. Montaigne is neither moralizing nor indulgent. He simply holds a mirror to our behavior. Similarly, and on some verses of Virgil, one of his more personal and discursive essays, he reflects on aging, sexuality, marriage, and gender roles. The essay stands out for its candor. Montaigne writes about sexual desire in old age, the illusions of romantic love, and the ways in which society forces women into roles that limit their freedom and dignity. Though a man of his time, Montaigne's reflections on gender and marriage remain strikingly modern in tone. And on experience, one of the final and most significant essays in the collection, Montaigne returns to the central role of personal observation and lived reality. He argues that experience is a better guide to life than abstract principles. Montaigne prefers to trust what he has seen and felt rather than what others claim to know. This practical, skeptical philosophy resists dogma. He even questions legal and medical authorities, pointing out how both professions often act with more confidence than actual knowledge. For Montaigne, wisdom lies not in mastery of rules, but in adaptability, self-awareness, and the courage to think for oneself. Experience, in his eyes, is messy and nuanced, far from the idealized order philosophers often seek. This mistrust of rigid ideology extends to politics. In On Coaches, Montaigne begins with a description of exotic customs and luxury carriages, but gradually transitions into a commentary on colonialism and conquest. He critiques the European assumption of superiority over indigenous cultures, noting that so-called barbarians may in fact live more justly than their colonizers. Montaigne does not idealize native societies, but he uses the comparison to question the brutality and hypocrisy of European imperialism. This relativistic lens, shaped by his reading of classical history and reports from the New World, is an early expression of cultural criticism. Montaigne's ability to link the local and the global, the personal and the political, is a hallmark of his style. Another major concern for Montaigne is the role of custom in shaping belief. On custom and not easily changing an accepted law, he reflects on how people often confuse tradition with truth. What seems natural to one culture may be unthinkable to another. Montaigne observes that moral values are largely shaped by habit and environment rather than reason. This realization breeds tolerance. By recognizing the relativity of customs, he urges readers to be cautious in judging others and themselves. Rather than adopt a rigid moral code, he recommends flexibility and openness. It's not that all actions are equal, but that moral certainty should be tempered with humility and context. In keeping with this ethos, Montaigne consistently avoids prescriptive advice. Even in essays like On Solitude, where he extols the value of withdrawing from society, he does so cautiously. He admits that solitude is not for everyone, and even for him, it is not always easy. The idea is not to abandon the world, but to learn how to be alone with oneself. This introspective solitude is not a retreat from life, but a space for reflection, honesty, and self-possession. Montaigne often contrasts this with the performative nature of public life, where people are pressured to play roles rather than be true to their nature. Solitude, in this sense, becomes a means of resisting conformity and regaining authenticity. Yet Montaigne is not a hermit. He writes about social life with nuance, as seen in On the Art of Conversation. He values dialogue, especially with those who challenge his views. Conversation for Montaigne is not about winning arguments, but about exchanging ideas and refining one's thinking. He bemoans those who speak only to dominate or impress. Instead, he praises those who can listen, question, and adapt. This essay reveals Montaigne's belief in intellectual humility, the idea that truth is better pursued in shared inquiry than in rigid debate. His ideal is a mind always in motion, open to contradiction and growth. Amid these explorations, Montaigne also finds time for lightness. In On Smells, he muses on the power of scent and its strange capacity to evoke memory or disgust. In On Thumbs, he humorously notes the odd dependence we have on such a small part of the body, observing that its loss renders many daily tasks impossible. These short, playful essays serve as a reminder that for Montaigne, no subject is too trivial to explore. His curiosity is vast, and his approach is unpretentious. He elevates everyday observations into philosophical reflections, showing that the mundane is often rich with meaning. Through all these writings, a portrait of the man emerges, not as a static identity, but as a living process of self-examination. Montaigne's self-portrait is full of contradictions. He is brave and anxious, wise and naive, skeptical and trusting. He does not seek to resolve these contradictions, but to understand and live with them. His literary form-loose, wandering, non-linear mirrors this ethos. The essay for Montaigne is not a finished argument, but a process of discovery. He writes as he thinks, and the reader follows the rhythm of a mind in motion. This second portion of the essays affirms Montaigne's commitment to complexity. He neither idolizes reason nor abandons it, neither condemns society nor flees from it. His goal is not perfection, but clarity about the world and about himself. He invites readers not to adopt his views, but to engage in the same process of examination. That is the enduring power of his work. It does not prescribe a path, but opens a space for reflection. His essays remain relevant not because they answer timeless questions, but because they ask them with honesty and courage. As the essays progress, Montaigne turns further inward, becoming more meditative and personal. Though he never abandons his broad scope, still referencing ancient philosophers, cultural customs, and political matters, there is a shift toward deeper self-analysis. In On Repentance, Montaigne reveals his belief that the self is not a fixed entity to be perfected, but a fluid and evolving thing. He argues that repentance, as commonly understood, is based on a false ideal of a stable, virtuous self. For Montaigne, we do not repent because we have strayed from who we are. We repent because who we are is always shifting. He asserts that we are made of contradictions, and that self-acceptance involves embracing our inconsistencies rather than denying them. He continues this line of thought in On Vanity, one of the longest and most revealing essays in the collection. Here, Montaigne discusses aging, mortality, fame, and self-deception. He is aware of his declining health and the approach of death, but rather than retreat into fear or regret, he examines these conditions with an almost clinical detachment. Vanity, to Montaigne, is the desire to appear a certain way rather than be a certain way. He critiques both himself and others for posturing, for caring too much about reputation, and for trying to construct a public image that doesn't align with the lived experience. What he ultimately advocates is sincerity, not in the sense of moral virtue, but in the commitment to presenting oneself honestly, even when that self is weak, flawed, or inconsistent. In On Giving the Lie, Montaigne reflects on the dangerous power of language and falsehood. He notes that lying is not merely a moral failing, but an attack on human connection. If words cannot be trusted, society begins to unravel. Montaigne links truth to personal integrity, suggesting that being truthful is as much about self-respect as it is about social trust. He also points out that people lie most often to protect pride or avoid shame, not always to cause harm. Again, his lens is compassionate. He does not excuse lying, but attempts to understand its roots in fear and insecurity. His emphasis remains on self-awareness, the ability to catch oneself in small deceits, and to be brave enough to confront them. In several essays, Montaigne returns to physical suffering and the limits of the body. In On The resemblance of children to their fathers, he blends biology, philosophy, and personal reflection, pondering inheritance and identity. He seems fascinated by how traits, both physical and moral, pass from one generation to another, often unpredictably. Montaigne resists simple explanations for human behavior, and here he questions whether character is shaped more by blood, environment, habit, or sheer chance. The unpredictability of human nature, again, emerges as a central theme. Just as we change across time, we are also shaped by unseen forces we cannot fully understand or control. This leads into another major concern, the illusion of control. And on prognostications, Montaigne ridicules astrologers and fortune-tellers who claim to predict the future. He believes our desire for certainty often leads us into superstition. Montaigne does not dismiss the need for planning, but he warns against the arrogance of thinking we can outmaneuver fate. On constancy, he examines how people respond to misfortune, noting that while we cannot always avoid suffering, we can shape our responses to it. These essays show his engagement with Stoicism, especially the belief that internal composure matters more than external chaos. Yet Montaigne is not a rigid Stoic. He admits his own fears, his anxieties, and the moments when pain or grief overpower him. His honesty lies in acknowledging the ideal while confessing how far he often falls short of it. In On Fear, Montaigne dives into the psychological dimension of terror. He argues that fear itself is often more debilitating than the danger it anticipates. Using anecdotes from history and his own life, he illustrates how fear can lead to irrational decisions, social breakdown, and even cruelty. This essay resonates with modern readers because of its psychological depth. Long before the development of contemporary psychology, Montaigne was diagnosing how emotion distorts reason. His writing does not pathologize fear, but treats it as a shared human burden. What matters, he suggests, is not avoiding fear, but understanding it, and ideally learning to live with it without letting it control us. In these later essays, Montaigne becomes increasingly contemplative, returning again and again to the subject of death. And on the length of life, he challenges the idea that a long life is necessarily better than a short one. What matters is not the quantity of time, but the quality of one's engagement with it. A short life lived with fullness and thoughtfulness may be worth more than a long one frittered away in distraction. This echoes earlier themes from "To philosophize is to learn to die," but here Montaigne's tone is more seasoned, more weathered. He seems more comfortable with the inevitability of death, not because it is easy, but because resisting it is futile. Montaigne's views on health and medicine also reveal his skeptical nature, and on the power of the imagination, he recounts numerous stories of people falling ill or recovering based on belief rather than medicine. He doesn't deny the value of medicine, but he questions its overconfidence and highlights the placebo effect centuries before it was formally studied. He observes how powerful the mind can be in shaping physical reality, and notes that fear or desire alone can cause physical symptoms. Again, this is part of his broader distrust of expertise divorced from lived reality. He sees the imagination not as a whimsical faculty, but as something capable of reshaping perception and health alike. Throughout these essays, Montaigne's style becomes more digressive, even chaotic at times. He warns the reader that he writes in the order in which thoughts occur to him, not according to any master plan. This honesty is part of his genius. While many philosophical works attempt to impose order on chaos, Montaigne lets the chaos speak. He does not hide his confusion or change his mind to fit a system. His work models a form of self-inquiry that is unguarded, even messy. It is precisely this imperfection that makes him so relatable. His writing reflects the movement of consciousness, itself fragmented, associative, and deeply human. By the end of this phase of the essays, Montaigne has built not a philosophy of conclusions, but a philosophy of process. He never claims to have figured life out. Instead, he invites readers to look within themselves, to challenge received ideas, and to accept the self in all its contradiction. He is less concerned with constructing truth than with uncovering illusion. In doing so, he clears space for the individual to live more freely, not by rejecting society, but by knowing oneself within it. In the final stretch of Montaigne's essays, his tone becomes even more intimate, as though he is writing not for the world, but to clarify his thoughts before death. By this point, he has spent over 2 decades refining the collection, revisiting earlier reflections with the benefit of age and illness. The result is a layered, recursive work where ideas appear, evolve, and sometimes contradict one another. Montaigne is not disturbed by this lack of consistency. In fact, he embraces it. In his view, the mind in motion is more authentic than a philosophy frozen in dogma. He writes not to prove, but to witness his experience as honestly as he can. One of the final and most revealing essays is On Experience, which serves as a kind of summation of his entire project. Here, Montaigne returns to the body, illness, food, pleasure, and aging. He discusses his personal ailments in detail: gout, kidney stones, digestive troubles, not to complain, but to reflect on how intimately our thoughts are tied to our physical condition. He dismisses the idea that philosophy should exist apart from the body. On the contrary, he argues that the body is an integral part of our understanding. Pain, for instance, is not a mere distraction, it is a form of knowledge. He insists that we must pay attention to our sensations, not ignore them in favor of abstract reasoning. Montaigne's relationship to the senses is central to this concluding phase. He is unapologetically earthy in his descriptions of daily life meals, bowel movements, sleepless nights, sexual desire. Rather than seeing these as distractions from thought, he places them at the heart of human existence. We are all patchwork, he writes, and so shapeless and diverse in composition that each piece, each moment, plays its own game. He is skeptical of asceticism, which he sees as a form of pride or denial. The true art of living, in his eyes, is to accept the full spectrum of experience, the noble and the crude, the joyful and the painful. Even as he reflects on aging and approaching death, Montaigne's tone remains grounded. He does not fear death as a metaphysical event. Rather, he fears the physical decline that precedes it. He writes of memory loss, of mental fog, of losing the ability to write or ride or reflect. And yet, even in this, he finds material for contemplation. He suggests that the soul, like the body, has its seasons, and that withdrawal, fatigue, and contradiction are natural parts of the human cycle. He does not glorify youth or strength, but urges readers to honor the stage of life they are in. For Montaigne, aging is not a tragedy, it is a shift in the focus of one's attention. Throughout these later essays, he returns again and again to moderation, not as a rule to be followed, but as a natural wisdom gained from self-observation. He rejects both excess and deprivation. Whether discussing food, sex, conversation, or leisure, he encouraged readers to find their own balance rather than adhere to imposed ideals. His suspicion of rigid virtue is evident in how he critiques moral perfectionism. Those who claim to be above contradiction, he suggests, are either blind or dishonest. Montaigne values integrity over purity. To know one's own limits, to be able to say I was wrong or I don't know, this to him is the mark of wisdom. Another persistent theme in these closing reflections is the importance of freedom, specifically freedom of thought. Montaigne values independence above all. He believes in the right to dissent, to doubt, to retreat from public life when necessary. He views personal sovereignty as essential to the good life. This doesn't mean selfishness or isolation. It means choosing one's own path rather than following the herd. In many ways, this makes Montaigne a forerunner of modern liberal individualism. But his version is tempered by humility. Freedom is not license to impose one's will, but the responsibility to govern oneself. Montaigne's literary style in these final essays reflects his philosophy. His sentences are long, often winding, filled with qualifications, digressions, and side notes. He distrusts clean conclusions and prefers to show his thought unfolding. This technique allows him to embody the very values he promotes: openness, honesty, reflection, and fluidity. The essays are less like a finished sculpture and more like a garden tended over time, with new growth sprouting beside the old. They do not argue so much as reveal, inviting the reader into the rhythms of a thoughtful life. What makes the essays endure is not their erudition, though Montaigne quotes widely from Plato, Seneca, Cicero, Plutarch, and others, but their voice. Montaigne's I is one of the most distinctive in Western literature: candid, skeptical, often humorous, and deeply humane. He writes as a man fully aware of his limits, yet unafraid to examine them. His project is neither confession nor instruction, but inquiry. And in this inquiry he achieves something remarkable. He turns personal reflection into universal wisdom. By the time the reader reaches the end of the essays, they feel not that they have read a treatise, but that they have come to know a man. Montaigne's transparency, his willingness to present himself in all his complexity, creates a rare intimacy across centuries. His invitation is simple yet profound. Do not strive to be perfect, but to be honest. Observe yourself, question your certainties, welcome contradiction, and find peace not in mastery, but in understanding. In a world where so much is built on illusion, Montaigne's legacy is clarity. Not the clarity of certainty, but the clarity of seeing oneself as one truly is, flawed, changeable, and fully human. His essays are not meant to be read once and set aside, but returned to, like an old friend whose company deepens with time. They offer not answers, but the tools to ask better questions. In this lies their enduring value and their quiet, profound brilliance. And so we reach the end of our journey through essays by Michel de Montaigne, work that invites us not to chase perfection, but to understand ourselves with honesty and grace. If this reflection stirred something within you, take a moment today to pause, to observe your thoughts, and to be at ease with your contradictions. Thank you for sharing this time with us. If you found value in this narration, consider subscribing to Mindful Reads for more timeless wisdom, slowly unraveled. Until next time, read slowly, live deeply, and stay curious.